Welcome to Independently Speaking, the podcast from the Independent Schools Association. ISA represents head teachers leading independent schools across the UK, each one unique. From small community schools to specialist institutions focused on performing arts, outdoor education, faith, sport, or special educational needs. ISA members reflect the remarkable diversity of independent education. Join us as we hear from school leaders navigating the challenges and opportunities shaping their schools and the wider sector. And now, here is your host, ISA Director of Education and Inclusion, Helen Stanton-Tonner.
Welcome to the ISA podcast, Independently Speaking. I am your host, Helen Stanton-Tonner, the Director of Education and Inclusion for ISA. In today's episode, we're exploring leadership and governance in independent schools, with a particular focus on who holds influence, whose voices are heard around the decision-making tables, and why broadening representation isn't about optics, but about strengthening schools. I'm delighted to be joined by Johan Jensen and Leah Morris, founders of the Minority Ethnic Governors Network, or MEGAN. ISA has partnered with Johan and Leah alongside All in Education to develop new guidance for schools on inclusive governor recruitment, to develop practical, thoughtful support designed to help boards widen their reach, reduce unintended barriers, and improve governance effectiveness. Johan brings deep experience from across governance, inclusion, and system leadership, and has long worked at the intersection of education, social purpose, and board effectiveness. Leah is a highly respected consultant, coach, and facilitator whose work supports organisations and leaders to embed inclusive practice in meaningful, sustainable ways. Together, they've built MEGAN as a trusted network supporting schools to attract, appoint, and retain governors from a wider range of backgrounds by strengthening recruitment processes and decision-making. Today, we're going to talk about leadership, governance culture, and the realities of change. What's holding boards back, what's beginning to shift, and how schools can move forward with confidence and integrity. Johan and Leah, welcome to the ISA podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you both here.
Thank you
so much.
Now, if I could ask you both, obviously you founded MEGAN in response to what you were seeing across independent school governance. Could you maybe start by telling our listeners about sort of that moment, what wasn't working, and why you felt change was needed?
I think I'll kick it off by saying in 2025, I had a meeting with Debbie Innes-Turnell, who is the chair of governors at King's Gloucester. We had a conversation about how she felt as a chair in the independent school sector, and her first response was, "It's a lonely place to be black." And I said to her that because I do inclusion diversity work in the independent school sector full time, I can help try to convene a network. And that's really where it all started, to try to get together governors from a minority ethnic background together to share their experiences and to learn from each other. And it's really kind of like gone from there. We have then kind of developed what we've wanted to do with MEGAN into increasing representation on boards in the independent school sector, and that's very much where our focus lies at the moment, because we have acknowledged that the issue is not that there is a lack of talent out there, but that there is definitely a lack of access to opportunities, and that's what we want to change.
Absolutely. And I think, following on from what Johan said, it's definitely been an area that has seemed as though it's behind the curtain. Lots of people know that independent and boarding schools have governors, but actually knowing what goes on in those meetings and how to get into the room has been something that has been a little bit of a mystery. In my work with schools, there has been this conversation around, yes, we'd love to have more people, but it's also connecting those people to the space especially if they don't know where to go to apply to be a governor at a school.
Absolutely, and UN governance is often described as strategic and neutral, yet we know sort of the board composition really matters, doesn't it? And sort of from your experience, how does who is around the table really influence the quality of the leadership and decision making in the schools themselves?
Well, I think boards, they shape what questions that are asked on a strategic level, and that directly affects the discussions in the room. So when you have diverse perspectives around the table, which goes to the question of who is around the table, that can then surface risks and also blind spots at an earlier stage. Um, the converse of that is that if you have a very homogenous board, then you tend to get to reach consensus very, very quickly without the space or the different perspectives to raise risks and also to raise concerns from those perspectives that may have been blind spots before. So the question of who is around the table is critical for the effectiveness of the quality of decision making and the type of questions that are being asked in a board. So who is in the room actually shapes what gets seen and also what is being said and then what is being decided.
I was going to say, can I be slightly controversial and say, when we talk about neutrality, we are talking about having an overall perspective and not just being seated in our own views. But actually, there does need to be some emphasis on particular views, because actually that board needs to represent the school as a whole. It needs to represent the whole community, whether that's the pupil body, the teaching body, or actually parents. So there does need to be a wider perspective on information, on things that affect various groups. And I think what's been missing for a long time is we look at various areas. So whether it's finance, we look at legal, we look at those things, but we don't look at actually what alternate viewpoints come with that. So as Johan was saying, having a very homogenous educational background only leads you down one path of looking at issues.
Yes, yeah, no, I completely agree. And many boards, in their search for diverse candidates, they sometimes say they struggle to find them, Leah. And you've already sort of mentioned this a little bit earlier. So drawing on Megan's work, what are the most common myths and assumptions that limit recruitment before it even begins?
Well, definitely, there seems to be a misnomer that the diverse people aren't necessarily interested. What we've done through Megan is we've specifically looked at people from professional backgrounds, so whether that is a legal background, safeguarding, finance, HR, just so they can bring that knowledge to the table. I think what's been missing for a long time is how that outreach is done. A lot of the time, it's people who are known to the circle that already exists. So a tap on the shoulder or a conversation among each other of, do you know anybody? And it's usually somebody who's serving on another board, who's rolling off and can roll on to. So essentially, it's very much, there's been a miss within the whole, can we approach our parent body? Can we just put out a piece of recruitment to say, we as X school are looking for diverse governors, would you be interested? So I think there's been a lack of being able to do that comfortably and confidently.
It's important to highlight the fact that in the last ISE census, we saw that close to 50% of the independent school pupil population are from ethnic minorities. And this representation is not reflected on our governing boards. So if we do want our governing boards to represent the community that we serve, it is important that we focus on minority ethnic representation on our boards.
And partly because of that lack, I mean, ISA has been really pleased to partner with you, Johan, and All in Education and Megan to develop a new inclusive governor recruitment guide. What do you think makes this guidance different from previous approaches to board diversity in the sector?
I think it's important to acknowledge something that we have heard from ISA members as well in some of the meetings that I've had and met with schools, is that recruiting for governors, full stop, is a challenge. That it is something that you really need to go out of your way to encourage people to look at opportunities that your school might have, and then to be able to sell that opportunity. These governor positions, they're unpaid. They require you to spend a lot of time going through board papers and also to attend meetings. So it can be a hard sell sometimes. And I think this is why this guidance is so important, because this guidance kind of goes to the heart of what makes people tick when you go out to search for candidates. You have that person at the front of mind when you're trying to sell these opportunities. So it goes beyond just looking at the diversity issue. It is trying to make your recruitment more effective, full stop. So I think that's what's quite unique about it. What it also is that it's a very practical guide, and it comes with tools that you can apply immediately within your school. So you don't need to spend a lot of time trying to think about, so how do we actually enact this? We are telling you step by step, not just through principles, but step by step, exactly what you need to do this. I think that takes away some of the maybe nervousness about this area, because it can be quite something that makes people unsure about what to say and what to do. What this guy does is to tell you in very straightforward terms exactly what you need to do in order to put yourself in a better position as a school when you need new skills on your governing board, when you need new experiences on your governing board, how you go about obtaining that. So I think that's what makes it a unique piece of guidance. It goes beyond just being about awareness. It's about changing how recruitment actually happens.
And one of the other elements of guidance obviously emphasizes transparency and outreach and clarity rather than those informal networks, Leah, that you mentioned being a priority. So Leah, are those elements so critical for strengthening governance, sort of not just widening representation? What's the reason for that?
For all the diverse groups involved, for all parents involved, they want to see, what does the school really represent? Often we have Latin phrases, we have things, mottos that schools live by. They want to know, okay, is recruitment an open process? Can anybody with the relevant skills and experience be part of the governing body here? What does that mean in reality? What decision making are we able to make? Because I think the other thing we also need to be mindful of is it's one thing about having increasing diversity on your board, but do they have a voice? Are they expected to agree with everything? Are they expected to nod along and not say, actually, I see a problem in this area? So how do we make sure that everybody can see it's a level playing field? whether your process is submit an application, go for a tour around the school, is that process continuous for everybody? Or is it one process for one and another process? If you've been in education, you're known already to members of the board.
And some governors, they sort of step away from this, don't they? They worry that focusing on inclusion risk politicizing governance or compromising standards because they sometimes feel they're narrowing the field rather than widening the field. And how do you respond to concerns when you hear those?
I'm really glad that you asked that question, because I think that goes to the heart of people being nervous about this, and also maybe thinking that this is tokenistic. This is something that is that they are forced to do for some reason. This is completely in their own self-interest to be thinking and doing something about, because this is about strengthening governance and definitely not lowering standards. Like when you broaden the pool of candidates, that's what we're trying to do here, then your chances of finding the best candidate just increases. That's what this is about. It's not about lowering any standards. Diversity brings better scrutiny. As Leah says, you can get more transparency through that greater scrutiny, and you also get better decision making. So this is something that is as far away from lowering standards or being a tokenistic approach as you can possibly get. This is about improving your processes and also then eventually proving your outcomes. So the focus remains firmly on skills, the contribution, and also accountability. That sits at the very center of Megan's approach, our discussions, and our training for prospective governors. That's what's at the very heart of things.
Can I just add? I think what's interesting about the question is when we think about the word politicizing, are we then saying, if we hold a mirror up to the board as it stands and the board is very homogenous, does it only become political when diverse people join? So that in and of itself is concerning. And also, the compromising standards. Again, are we saying that the minute the board becomes diverse, the standards have suddenly become compromised? So are we saying then that diverse people can't bring the same level of professionality, the same level of insight, knowledge, subject knowledge? Are we saying that's not possible? Because if that's the starting point, I think that's part of the problem and why we don't have more diverse governors, because the viewpoint is very narrowed and the viewpoint is also very negative.
And it's really important, isn't it, to sometimes turn these questions around, just as you did there, Leah, so you're actually looking from the other perspective. And it's interesting how that shift of focus actually reveals a lot of the insecurities and possibly the fears that people may well be having from looking at things in a very narrow way. But for those chairs of governors or heads that might be our listeners today, and they recognise what you're saying, Leah, and what you're saying, Johan, and the need to broaden their board, but they're feeling really kind of unsure of where to start. Leah, what's one sort of really practical first step that you would recommend for them?
Breathe and just start. So, I would say starting point would be put out an email to your parent body and say, we are looking for governors, and be very explicit in terms of the areas that you're looking for, whether that's HR knowledge, sustainability, asset management, whatever it is, put that out, because at the end of the day, we know that there are going to be lots of professional people with connections who, whether it's of interest to themselves or someone else, they will be able to share that for you. And being able to start it from that point, actually, it's also a great way of communicating to your parent body about what you're doing. So you're showing them from the get-go, actually, this is something we want to do. We're reaching out to you. We want you to be involved in it. Can you help? So that's the easiest way of starting.
That's very practical advice. Yeah. Johan, did you have an addition?
Yes, pick up ISA's new guidance. That would be my first step. Because what that says is exactly what Leah is saying. First of all, define the need. What is the need on your board? What are the gaps in terms of skills, experience, and perspective? And you go from there. Then you can start to do wider outreach. And the guide is telling you exactly how to do that.
Now, as we draw this conversation to a close, if I could open the final question sort of to both of you, sort of looking ahead, what do you hope will be different about independent school governance, say in 5 years' time, if this work really takes hold?
I'll start by saying in 5 years' time, I would really like to see that boards are better reflecting the communities that they serve. That is absolute number one. I am also hoping that in 5 years' time, that more boards are governing more inclusively. And by that, I mean that they are able and have the skill to be able to listen to every voice around the table and really capitalize on that rich diversity that is around the table. I think those would be my top two that I would really like to see in 5 years' time.
I absolutely agree. Having more governors that look like their schools, look like the children within their schools would be fantastic. I think having this open channel of communication between organisations like Megan, where we have lots of people saying, I'd love to be a governor, and being able to match them with schools who are willing and able and prepared to nurture them and bring them along on that journey with them would be so hugely beneficial, not only to the schools, but everyone that the schools touch, everyone that the schools are visual to. So the wider community, if they were to go onto any school's website and see that they have a diverse governing board, as well as diverse teachers, as well as diverse pupils, it just starts to break down the barriers so that schools don't lose that attraction for everybody. Because at the moment, it can be very exclusive, it can be very off-putting, as opposed to welcoming and open.
Brilliant. Thank you. Johan, Leah, thank you so much. It's been such a thoughtful and grounded conversation and a pleasure to speak to you today.
Thank you very much, Helen.
We've been reminded today that inclusive governance is not a side issue. It's central to strong leadership, better decisions, and long-term sustainability. Broadening who contributes to governance isn't about tokenism or trends. It's about insight, challenge, and responsibility. The partnership between ISA, Megan and All in Education reflects a shared commitment to helping schools move forward with clarity and confidence. And I know many of our listeners will find today's discussion both reassuring and practical. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in to the ISA podcast, Independently Speaking. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with colleagues. Join us next time as we continue exploring how independent schools can lead with purpose, integrity, and humanity. Until then, stay curious, stay connected.
You've been listening to Independently Speaking, the podcast of the Independent Schools Association. For more information about ISA and the schools we support, please visit isaschools.org.uk.